Hello everyone, my name is Hadil and I do generative art and creative coding videos or tutorials on YouTube, Instagram, and some courses on Skillshare. And I do all forms of generative art. I want to experiment more with stuff other than just doing generative art in processing, especially in the 3D world. So today, we're going to talk about coding or creative coding specifically in Blender. I've made a tutorial before with animation nodes, but today we're skipping that and we're going straight in with Python. Now, I'm very new to this, but I want to experiment with you all. So I thought I want to learn something new and I want to become better at it. Why not film it or film my experiments? So this is going to be a two-part video. And in the first part, we're going to create the elements, or we're going to code the thing that we're creating, which is this, by the way. And in the other video, or in part two, we're talking materials and animations through Python. I also have my code on the side, so I do check it every now and then. The only problem with Python and Blender is that the documentation isn't that great. So we're not talking documentation today. I'm just going to go through what I've used and what I've seen online regarding those lines of code and if they're the best way to create something. So let's start. I've already saved my file. With Blender especially, I've had way too many crashes that I now save my file when I first start. The first thing that I do is just go from whatever you start with to scripting because it's laid out already. The only problem with Blender on Mac, that's what I know, or that's what I figured out, is that you don't have a console that shows you every error. This only shows you what you're doing. So if I click on this, let's say, it shows you what you're doing if you want to use it in code, but it's not that helpful. And this console is for you to use Python in. So it's just an interactive console for Python. So I don't necessarily use it unless I want to try a few things or I want to see what properties and methods are inside of a module. If you want to open it, there are ways to open a console or to open Blender through your terminal or console. I've used that in the past and it worked, but now it doesn't work. It just opens Blender and then freezes. So I'm not sure what is happening there. So I was working on this a little bit blindly. So whenever I get an error, I don't really understand what happened, but I'll figure that out for the next time. So for now, we'll just start with a new file. You can name it whatever you want, but we're gonna work with cubes because it's the easiest thing and it's the default thing for Blender, but hopefully we're gonna make it a little bit better. And then I'm gonna just call it random cubes. And then you're going to have to import a module called bpy or Blender Python, basically, because nothing really works without it. And I also like to import two other modules, the random, or from random actually. I'm going to import rand int, and I think it's called uniform for floating numbers. And lastly, I do import math. And you can change the name of these if you think they're long, but I think they're fine. Let's see how we can create a cube by using the ops module. So bpy.ops or operators, and go into mesh. So we're going to use the mesh operators, and then primitive cube add is the method that we're going to use from this mesh operator. So primitive underscore cube underscore add, and then we're going to have to add, actually there's no semicolon. We're going to add the arguments. Okay, I know I said we're not going to talk documentation, but I want to show you what options you have for the arguments for the primitive cube. So if I go to operators, it's going to be a long way to get there. And then if I go down to mesh operators, and then I just do find, because who has the time to look for it? And there is the cube. So those are the arguments that you're allowed to use, or you can use basically. What we're going to use is size and location and then scale. So for size, and if you check over here, we have default values. So all of these are actually optional. So for size, it's a float, and we're going to say just 1. And then for location, we're going to use randomness. And that's where the generative art comes in. And then lastly, we're going to use scale. And now I can use uniform because I want the location to be a float value rather than an integer. It gives a more dynamic look because with integers, you're going to just get overlapping cubes a lot. But with a float, when the cubes overlap, they're not going to look bad. They're at least going to look as if you are connecting some of the cubes together. So the way you can use uniform is just like you've used it in P5.js or processing. You have a minimum value and a maximum value. So for minimum, I'm going to use a negative value, and then for maximum, I'm going to use a positive value. It's going to be the same, so I'm just going to create a constant that I'm going to call val, random value basically. And I'm going to give it a value of 1.5. And now I can use that constant over here. And the location takes in x, y, and z as arguments. So I'm going to copy this for x, y, and z. And then the same goes for scale. But for scale, we're going to use different values because we don't really need to go from a negative value to a positive value. So I'll go from 0.5 to 1, and it's going to be uniform, sorry. And then the same goes for the other axes. Now, if I run it, we have a cube, or rather it's not a cube because we have different scales that it's rectangular now. And now if I run it over and over, I get a multitude of cubes. The only problem with this is that we're gonna get more and more cubes every time. So what I need to do is delete everything, or what I wanna do is create an application or create a program that is similar to processing in the way it runs. Everything just deletes and then it runs all over again. So if I want to do that, I'm going to have to delete all of the mesh that I have. And the way we can do this is by using the data module. Because we have multiple cubes now, or multiple meshes, we're going to have to do a for loop. So for item or mesh in bpy.data, because we're using the data module, and .mesh, so that's the list. I think it's meshes. Yeah, okay. And then in here, I'm going to say remove the mesh, basically. So I'll use the list again, bpy.data.meshes, and then remove, and I'll remove the mesh. So now everything in here is going to delete first. And you can create a function for this if you want to delete multiple things. So if you want to delete all materials, or you want to delete all objects or all cameras, if you want to make your cameras and lighting a little bit more dynamic. And now if I run this, all of the meshes are deleted every time, and it's run this way. But I want multiple cubes, but not in every run. So I want one run to create several cubes with different settings. So if I put this inside of for loop, we should get that. I'll do 50. So for I, it doesn't matter what value you put or what variable you put in here because we're not going to use it. in range, let's say 50. And I like the way for loops work in Python. It's much easier to write and shorter. But what's cool about Python is that it has a lot of modules that makes things easier. So whenever you find yourself in a pickle, then you can just rely on modules that you can find online. And now if I run this, we should get 50 cubes. But this is a little boring. So if I go to the camera angle, I actually don't like this. I always like to start with this point. I think if you want to do this, you can go to view and then align view, align active camera to view. I'm pretty sure a lot of you know more about Blender than I do. And then I also like to either make it 1080 by 920 or 920 by 920. Usually I do square, and then now we have a square. I also like to add a plane, so let's add that, and then I'll show you how to not delete the plane. Okay, let's move it backward a little bit. Why is it in the not in the center? Oh, the camera is not in the center. Okay. Now if I go back to the camera, I want to center it here on the z-axis and then on the x-axis. And this is usually how I do most of my camera alignment. And then we can take it back a little bit. All I know about moving and scaling and rotating is that if you click G, then you can move it. And if you want to keep it, let's say, so now it moves all the way or in all directions. But if I go Y, then I can just move it on the Y axis. If I do X and so on. And then R is for rotate and S is for scale. Okay, let's make sure it's scaled up to fit the camera. Also, I like to set the location. So if I do Control A, can apply the rotation and scale. Okay, now if what I wanted to show you from the beginning is the shading. Let's change it to cycles. Now I don't have the fastest computer. I don't have GPU that works with Blender. So it's only CPU. But it's fast enough for us to see the results over here. So I'm just gonna add another, or I'm gonna make this an area lamp. Again, I'm not talking about cameras or light because it's not really my forte, but I'm gonna show you what I usually do. So I like to use area lights, and I like to put one on the side, make it bigger. And if you click 7, you get top view. So I can just move this without worrying too much about it moving on the z-axis. And then I think I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. And then I'm going to add another one. Yeah, not the greatest at lighting. But if you look at it right now, it's a little bit boring just because it doesn't have bevel. It looks even more digital when it doesn't have bevel. And I've seen a lot of 3D artists say that nothing in real life is not beveled. Like even if it looks really sharp, it just have a little bit of bevel in there, and that what makes things natural. So when you look at these cubes over here, it's definitely not natural because it's very sharp. Okay, so let's add bevel. This is a teeny tiny bit complicated because I don't use modifiers and I'm going to use operators to set the mode to edit mode and then edit it or bevel it and then go back to object mode. And I'm going to do this inside of the for loop. So every time I create something or every time I add a cube, then I'm going to bevel it. And before we run this, I have to show you how to not delete a mesh or how to not delete the plane because we did that manually. You can also do it programmatically, but I'm not going to do that right now. We're just going to make sure that it doesn't delete it from the data. So if I go over here, I will add an if conditional. I'm going to say if the mesh is not bpi.data.meshes. And I'm going to look at the plane. And that way we make sure that it doesn't delay that. And make sure you indent with Python because that's the worst thing. Okay, now to bevel. So the first thing we need to do is go into edit mode. For that, we're gonna go into bpi and then ops. And then we're gonna go into the mesh. Actually, it's the object. And then set mode to edit. And it's all caps. And then I'm going to select all of the edges, mesh, and then select mode, and it's going to be edges, all caps. Actually, this should be mode set. And then bpi.ops. So we're going to use the operators a lot. ops.mesh.select all, just to make sure that everything is selected. And then over here, there are multiple values that you can use. I'm going to do select because you can also do deselect. There are two other values that I don't remember right now. I think invert is one of them. And then bpi.ops.mesh.bevel. And if you go over here, we're already in the mesh operators. We can do bevel. Let's see, where are you? And we can see all of the arguments that we can use. And it's the same arguments that you see when you use bevel in the edit mode section. What I change is the offset and the segments. Everything else I keep the same. I don't really play around with it. So offset at 0.05 and then segments. I usually do 4. Let's see. And now we can copy this one and go back to object. And then let's actually run this and see what happens. Oh, I forgot all of the keys for the arguments because it doesn't really work unless you do that. So I'm just going to delete those and keep the one that I copied just now. So yeah, this is mode, this is type, and this is mode, just similar to this, and this is the action of the selection. And now, if we run it, it should work. So it's fun. We have little bevels, and it looks nicer when we see it in cycles because it's softer. And if you go down over here to, let's say, 0.2, then you get a sharper edge, but I like it a little bit softer. Just because when it overlaps, it looks like it's blending in. And now when it comes to rotation, I still don't know how to do it other than doing it from here. But because I want the origin to be in the center, because I want to rotate everything together. So if I do it over here with rotation, so if I copy this and then do the rotation for each cube, we're going to see rotation for each cube clearly. But then what I want to do is just see the corner of this, or the corner of this whole model. So what I'm going to do, or this is what I'm doing so far until I learn how to do this better. I'm going to set the origin, and the way you can do this is using bpi ops.object and origin set, and then the type origin cursor. Now I have the origin in the center. So let's say I like this. I will just select all of the cubes and rotate it on the z-axis by 45 degrees. And then I want to rotate it again on the x-axis just a little bit. It's much nicer to look at it from this angle, right? Yeah, and that's pretty much it. We can just go to shading. I don't like this shading setup. So I usually go to layout and do this instead. And then do the camera over here, do cycles. And then this is if I want to select something, I don't select it over here. And then I go to shader editor. Let's select any of these and then create a new material. You can change the color. Let's just do something fun. I think I've created a material before that looks nice and something has a lot of edges, but I don't know how it's gonna look on this one, but let's try it. So if I do, I think it's glossy. And then if I do mix shader, I make it really shiny and I keep it at 50%, and then I do gold something, and then you can do noise texture for the factor. See, I like that. I don't know why. I'm not really a shiny person and shiny things kind of person, but for some reason this material just makes me happy. And then I select all of the cubes and then Control L, link materials. And then I get, oh, I haven't set the active. Which one now is the active? Is it? It's not the first one. So let's set the material, and then we'll do Command L, link materials. Now everything has that same material, and we can play with. And it's not the nicest on this one because it's just cubes, but we'll play with color a little bit more later on. Let's add a color ramp just to make that tighter, and you can fix the lighting. Oh, I also added. I remember now, because the lighting doesn't look right. I add an environment texture. Now this is a Blender tutorial instead of generative art tutorial. I think I just added a Studio One. Yeah, now it's nicer and brighter. And you see the line on the bevel is much nicer now because there's light coming from other sides than the ones that we just created. So if you, let's say I click this one and then I make this clear, maybe just make it like that. Yeah, I like to remove outline so we can see it. And then put a transparent BSDF over here. And then I do light path, shadow ray. Now we have lights casting in here. And now let's render the image. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I hope you really liked this video. For this, I just used manual materials, but in the second part, we're going to talk about setting materials randomly from Python, and we're also going to do a little bit of an animation in Python as well. I'm going to see with the files for Blender. We'll see how I upload that because I'm not going to put it on GitHub. So maybe in part 2, I'll figure out what to do with the Blender files. They'll probably be on Gumroad or something. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you for experimenting with me, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Blue dude, blue moon, kinda mysterious, shaded with someone I'm not really into. Do you need to fix it? Talking bullshit.